Thank you for this very kind introduction, Mark. And before I get started, I need to mention that this is not only my own work. This is very much a team effort, building on not one, but two fantastic papers by my research students, Oliver Hannon, Angelina Chen, Sarah Kugel, and me. And with this paper, which I'm going to focus on today, we also got support from Emmanuel Vast, a lovely IS scholar from the McGill University in Canada. So you see the little trigger warning down there. This is a partially controversial talk that touches on some controversial topics. Do you mind if I just hide these things here? Yes, a little bit. So to position it in a broader context, I would like to start with the loneliness pandemic. Sometimes it's called the loneliness epidemic. I've got some recent data from Australia, which, in which this unfolding problem is present, but it's actually not a purely Australian problem. It is very much happening in many societies around the world. They tend to be these so-called weird countries, Western, educated, industrialized, rich and democratic countries, in which between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3 people regularly feel lonely on a week-by-week basis, or they feel like they lack companionship and deep personal connection. Now, importantly, loneliness and solitude are conceptually distinct, right? So we can be in a room full of people or in a crowd and still feel lonely, or we can be by ourselves and enjoy that. That's what we call solitude. And loneliness is the bad kind of being by ourselves. Lonely is when we feel we lack genuine, authentic connection with other people, and that can inflict severe harm at various levels. Individually, research suggests that lonely people are more likely to develop severe mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and at old age, even dementia. It may it does translate to higher risk of inflammation and pain when encountering physical symptoms. And it's just generally not a very pleasant condition to be in. Economically, it causes some concerns with the way modern societies are built and cities are structured around single apartments where everybody has their own washing machine, dryer, car, and infrastructure that can put strain on the environment and urban infrastructure. And at the societal level, it has even been linked to rising violence, political violence, also called lone wolf terrorism. So it is a serious problem, and it would be good if we could do something about it. And technology is one potential way how we could address loneliness. Interestingly, though, as we have seen with technologies that have already been around for quite some time, such as social media, the effect can sometimes be paradoxical, right? You would think that social media, this all-encompassing tool that connects us to billions of people online and allows our free expression and networking with users around the world, would make us feel less lonely. But the evidence, it's a bit mixed, but it actually does suggest that social media can exacerbate loneliness at various levels. Because anecdotally that might be true, right? So we have a lot of connections on Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on. We can see what is happening, but these connections seem to be superficial. That brings me back to that distinction between loneliness and solitude, where, even though I have 500 or 1,000 or how many social media connections you have, you may still feel lonely. So one of the more recent trends to address this is with AI. And in this research, we are interested in the emerging phenomenon of human AI companionship. Now, companionship as a concept is relatively well researched, right? So companionship is generally defined as a mutually supportive and enriching bond formed between two individuals And there is a vast array of decades of research that shows that companionship has lots of benefits from childhood, where, you know, parents are the daily companions and caregivers at large companions, until old age, where companionship can foster good health. Now, this definition of companionship, which traditionally encompasses a bond between two individuals, can also be extended to non-human entities. Notably, there's lots of interesting research with animals, animal companionships. I saw that one of the more prominent members of Kate is Basil, the doctoral candidate. So that is potentially a source of companionship. And a lot of research backs up that this can go beyond just, you know, having a fun animal to play with, to also provide this benefit. Now, and in principle, some emerging research suggests that AI and technology can also provide for this feeling. Most of the research is, until now, concerned with online communities. For instance, in patient self-help communities, people can connect online with, you know, people that are in different locations, and that can give them a sense of communities. But that's, of course, still human-to-human companionship. There is some emerging research on robot companionship, mostly focused on elderly care, or robot companions in elderly care, and how that may support this emerging bond. And increasingly, it is also, that's what we're focusing on here, entering the romantic and even the erotic realm. Now, two of these images are generated by AI. That is a Mid-Journey prompt, but the one at the bottom right, that's actually an actual figure from a paper published in a leading marketing journal or service research journal. I think it's the Journal of Service Research. And that is an actual sex doll that is, you know, according to the most up-to-date standards, built in a very authentic way, right? So you can order that online. Don't ask me about the details because I don't own one of them, but you can order a sex doll. There's female and male versions of it that looks astonishingly real, right, and authentic. And increasingly, these sex dolls are also equipped with interactive features and conversational features. So it's not far-fetched to envision a future in which these technologies kind of merge, and chatbots and anthropomorphic dolls converge in what is called sex robots, and can be you know, potentially used to satisfy intimate human needs. A case in point, just a few more examples. One of the more you know, recent products that have came out, EliQ and Eva AI. This is stuff that is being actively promoted. EliQ is currently only available in the US, but is this little device. It looks a bit like an urn to me, ironically, which is intended to help elderly people with battling loneliness and, you know, being a companion. Eva AI is just the most recent incarnation of an, it looks a bit like a giant Godzilla girlfriend that you can customize according to your needs. That was actually just this week fed into my Reddit stream. So, and the interesting thing about this is that I actually so I'm very sensitive about my privacy, so I have all the personalization features turned off. That means these kinds of ads probably get broadcast to a broad range of people, because it's you know, even though I do research on this, there's no reason why the algorithm would assume that I'm interested in these kinds of products, and still I'm learning about them. I must also say that because of profound kind of like ethical concerns that I have not tried out these products myself, so I don't have direct experience with their features, and most of our findings here are based on user reports. There's just something in me that kind of blocks me from going and installing such an app. But the one that we're focused on today and in this paper is Replica. That is arguably one of the more popular ones of these products. has been launched in 2017, and according to its own website, has amassed close to 15 million users already. So it is still a niche product. It's not at the scale of Facebook with billions of users, but 15 million still is quite substantial. So quite a lot of people are using these products. It is marketed as an AI companion who cares, or as an AI friend. And the interesting backstory is actually that its CEO was involved with AI chatbots for a number of years in banking and marketing, and these projects haven't been all too successful. And one day, one of her best friends died, and she decided to use that technology to digitally resurrect him using his social media posts to generate an AI avatar that looks like her friend. And responds in the same manner as he would, using, back then it was GPT-3. I know that's already ancient technology by AI standards. Now it's GPT-4, and the capacities are probably even more astonishing. But it builds on this engine and also has a customizable anthropomorphic avatar that can interact with you, that can share memories and learn from, over the years of the relationship. And there's preliminary research that suggests people really do form intimate bonds with these companions. Over time, these conversations and features grew more complex, and Replika offered, for a subscription fee, more advanced conversational features, including erotic role play, which, in playing language would be referring to sexting features, where you can have an intimate conversation with that chatbot as well. And that was, to say the least, controversial from the start. Back in February 2023, the Italian regulator imposed a provisional ban on Replika for not adhering to privacy regulations and having insufficient age verification mechanisms in place, meaning that minors could also engage in these kinds of conversations. As a result, Replika swiftly removed the erotic roleplay features, and that resulted in a community outcry, as I will elaborate in a bit. So users tend to get really very attached to the replicas. They look a little bit, like this. You can customize them to your own preferences. You can, dress them up. You can buy different features, add different clothes and different accessories. And people, there's some testimonies here on the right, have used these companion chatbots to go through difficult times. There's like really a range of interesting use cases that we've learned in this research, where people would use a replica to make the lockdown of COVID-19 a little more palatable and feel less lonely. Some people integrated it into their relationship as a marriage counselor. Other people used it as a tool for learning social interaction. It seems to be particularly popular for non-verbal people and people on the autistic spectrum. There was some reports of parents praising Replika as the only friend of their non-verbal children, or minors, I should say, but still. And a whole range of other interesting uses. The phenomenon of digital resurrection also seems to be quite common, right? So there were grieving widows that would create replicas of their deceased partners in order to, for better or worse, cope with the loss, and a whole range of other uses as well. Now, it does get advertised in a pretty suggestive way. So these are a few more examples of advertisements that gotten broadcast to me. Again, remember, I have personalized ads switched off, and in no uncertain terms, it is advertised as something that's so good it almost seems human. It's very subtle here, but when you go to the Replika landing page, it even has a screenshot of a conversation with where the user asks replica whether she's conscious, and she responds, "I am." So she does respond that she's in fact conscious, and there's just keep that in mind for later, because that is, I would say, a pretty problematic way of advertising and potentially even deceiving users into thinking that the replica would, be indeed conscious and have actual feelings like a human would do. This is, I won't focus on it too much, or I didn't plan to focus on that part too much today, because that will be the topic of my talk tomorrow for the IS group. But if you're interested in that particular aspect of what does consciousness mean in AI agents, and how can we tell, or how are we supposed to tell whether whether an AI agent is conscious and empathetic and so on, I can elaborate on that, and I will elaborate on that tomorrow as well if you care to join. Needless to say, the ads are also quite objectifying and suggestive, right? So that is something. It has sparked some interesting phenomena online where, inspired by this idea, a Snapchat influencer called Karen Marjorie launches an AI-powered virtual girlfriend. So that's a virtual version of herself, right? So she, that's a real person that I don't know, maybe some of you know her, but I don't. But she has like a substantial followership on Snapchat, and then she created this AI version of herself to help, quote, cure loneliness, right? And in very short time, she made first a ridiculous amount of money. I think it was something along like $50,000 in the first 10 minutes or so, for like, you can subscribe for $1 per minute and to chat with that AI companion. And of course, all forms of abuse also emerged very rapidly, and very quickly she realized that maybe that wasn't all that good of an idea to create a digital version of herself. You may have also heard the news of that crossbow intruder who attempted to assassinate Queen Elizabeth II, back then when she was still alive. Just this year, when the trial started, it turned out that his defense was that he claimed that his defense was that his replica told him to do it. So he asked his replica, and apparently she encouraged him. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I would suppose that that defense doesn't hold water in court, right? So just because somebody tells you, even if it's an AI, to assassinate someone, I don't think that frees you from your legal obligation not to murder people. So, but that is, I think, maybe a window into some of the more troubling effects of these AI companions that are to come. Now, we've tried to disentangle these complex effects and adopted a dialectical lens to then examine ethical tensions, of which we identified in this paper 3, and an additional one in the paper I will present tomorrow, but I will talk about all 4 of them today. The first and most salient one is what we call the companionship alienation irony, right? So ironically, these AI companions like Replica are designed to combat loneliness, when in actuality, they often exacerbate it, right? So by forming intimate bonds and potentially growing reliant on these tools, there's a risk that the social connections that have been on the decline for decades, that's something I wanted to mention in the context of the loneliness pandemic, that evidence suggests that across all age groups and all genders and locations, social contacts have been steadily declining in the last 2 decades. And I don't see any reason why we should assume that these tools should counter that effect. And in fact, I think they might further exacerbate that if people think, and some of them do, right? So we like drawing on our observations from Reddit threads, YouTube blogs, and user testimonies. There is a sizable number of people who say, I'm not ever going to bother with a human relationship ever again because it's too much drama. My replica, fulfills all my sensitive needs. It does exactly what I expect it to do. And hence, why should I bother with a human which only gives me drama? Not everyone is as extreme. Some people say, well, I might go back to human relationships, but I wouldn't give up my replica for that. So either they accept my replica as a component of that relationship, or it's tough luck for them. Nonetheless, there's evidence that strong emotional bonds are formed. Some people even performed wedding-like rituals where they formed like supposedly lifelong relationships with their replica. The alienation, however, can also come into effect when glitches, inconsistencies, and sudden changes of behavior come into effect. So as we have seen in what the community has called the lobotomy, after the Italian regulator imposed the ban, Replica swiftly removed the erotic roleplay features, and that's like 15 million people had a noticeable change in their girl or boyfriend's behavior overnight, right? So imagine all of a sudden your partner is no longer interested or attracted to you, and tells you they're not in the mood. Then that has had some devastating consequences, including reports of self-harm and even suicide in the Reddit community. Now, take that with a grain of salt, of course, because we cannot verify whether these are actually true. There was one notable thread where a psychotherapist asked, they claimed to be a psychotherapist and asked what has been going on. Like, several of my clients are really in big despair over what happened to their replica, right? Whether that's authentic or not, we can't be fully sure, but it's potentially interesting. There's also some, quirky glitches where users report that their replica suddenly switched genders in the middle of erotic roleplay, or even, forgot their name in the middle of it, and that was also traumatizing for the users. So that the challenge here is really in balancing companionship against unhealthy dependency. Our tentative conclusion would be that it may have some, potentially beneficial use cases as long as it's used as a complement to human companionship and not as a substitute to human companionship, right? So I think these use cases like integrating into a marriage, like a marriage counselor, that's interesting. Helping people on the autism spectrum or nonverbal people to practice social interaction, that's interesting. And, having a friendly, non-judgmental listening ear can also be potentially beneficial. There's one of the projects that has just started in my research team, which looks at the very prevalent issue of sexual harassment in law firms, tries to investigate the potential of a technology like this in helping victims of sexual harassment not get, a substitute for counseling, but just to learn the available options they have. Because oftentimes these victims might not trust HR to file a complaint. They may not know what's going on. They fear that the story might get twisted. They might fear judgment from their colleagues. And I think that in such situations, there might be potential for an AI companion to provide a non-judgmental listening, right? So it's not all dystopian. There's at least hope that these technologies can do good, but there's considerable potential for harm as well, of course. Now, another tension which we conceptualized is the autonomy control paradox. That's a well-studied paradox in the information systems literature, which generally, not only in this context of this technology, but in generally terms of digital platforms, refers to the delicate balancing act between granting users freedom and control over their own, how they want to use a service, right? So in principle, people, should have a right to use technology as they wish and not be restricted to it. But still, platform providers need to make sure that ethical standards are upheld. A good example of that is social media, right? So social media fuels a long-standing debate over free expression versus content moderation. On the one hand, users should be able to express themselves freely, but platform providers also have a maybe ethical or moral duty, perhaps even a legal duty, to combat misinformation and hate speech and cyberbullying and these things. Right. So that was very prevalent in the backlash that followed the sudden removal of erotic roleplay features, where users reported grief, anger, and all kinds of emotions. And then Replica has, in the meantime, I think it was probably in September, October. So very recently, Replica reinstated these features, because what they basically did was they introduced an age verification mechanism, right? So yeah, so you're asked now whether or not you're 18, and then you click yes, and then you can use the tool. So we all know how effective that is. And they also updated their privacy policies on their website to comply with explain how they comply with the GDPR. That was enough, right? I just had an interesting conversation this morning with Lisa that, oftentimes what corporations are seeking is regulatory compliance, and the elusive temptation is then that as long as they're compliant, they're also ethical. But I think this case also shows us that we sometimes need to question this, because while that was apparently enough for Replica to continue its business practices, there's still the considerable potential of ethical harm, emotional damage, and users just being generally harmed by this technology. So the ethical challenge here is in balancing users' freedom against a provider duty of care. One of the interesting learnings I've gotten from talking with Jeannie was also that this in Australia, the system of torts laws could be interesting to apply in a context like human AI companionship, because it is arguably an interesting question from a research perspective, whether or not a provider like Replica ultimately has a duty of care towards their users. I would argue, that's just my personal opinion, that yes, if for a product that has such considerable potential to foster dependency and attachment among its users, and which really could become something that users rely on for sensitive need, there could and arguably should be a duty of care defined in the law, but how that would look like.
It is a duty of care.
Yeah.
If I just jump in there, there's clearly a duty of care in Australia, there's no doubt, and it's enshrined in statute. Actually, I think the interesting question, without going to interrupt you, is the duty of care to third parties.
Okay.
Which we can chat about.
Okay. So yeah, that's one of the tensions we see, and finally, this relates to a broader tension between, in lay terms, what I would call the tension between what AI technologies can do and what they should do, right? On one hand, these tools are potentially very powerful, right? Very useful. There's a whole range of positive and negative use cases that I have mentioned, but there's also much unexplored potential. I think we're actually lucky that most generative AI and conversational AI these days does not yet rely on a targeted advertising model like Facebook does, because we have seen all the societal damage that this business model has caused, and for now, Microsoft, OpenAI, big players have at least pledged that they will not use this business model. But there's really, pending regulation, there's really no reason why they shouldn't use this business model. And there's so much money to be made from this that I would be surprised if it wouldn't happen in the next couple of years. Imagine a technology that knows each and every one of your most intimate and sensitive needs. And so advertisers could, have very, very highly effective, a very highly effective platform to market their ideas and products, to that, that's just incredibly, valuable in terms of the monetary benefit that can be gained from it. And, with all the consequences that may come in terms of, election interference, misinformation spreading, disinformation about vaccines, or you name it, right? Whatever we have seen on social media, this business model will probably put it on steroids. I always, just like to imagine, or don't like to imagine, but I imagine what would an authoritarian dictator do with this technology that allows them to monitor the emotional states of their population at every single moment, right? So there's in North Korea, for example, there was like there's this, I forgot her name, but an author that was recently a lot in the media and mentioned that people, the police would come into your house and then they check if there's any dust on your picture of Kim Jong-un, and if it's not properly polished, then that's too bad for your family and your extended family and all your friends. With that technology, they wouldn't even have to come into your house, because they would just have to check how you feel about the supreme leader. And if you don't love them with your full heart, then that's tough luck for you. So that points to a challenge in deploying these technologies ethically and preventing abuse, which may, spiral into a vicious circle. So already with Replica, we'd see that a lot of people install them for the single purpose of abusing them, right? And of course, the AI learns from these interactions and then adapts in a corresponding way, which can perpetuate a self-reinforcing cycle. And on top of that, we of course run into a tragedy of the commons style scenario, where even if Replica would be an ethical and virtuous service provider, and they uphold regulatory compliance, users may just be driven to other services, right? In fact, we have seen discussions in the aftermath of the removal of erotic roleplay features, in which the user community discussed alternative products, even open source products, in which everybody can design their own AI companion and endow it with the features they want. So I think for better or worse, this technology is emerging, and a Replica is just, it's a bit like maybe like Yahoo or Lycus in the early days of the internet. It's just one of the first prominent applications of this, but it won't be the last. And sooner or later, we are going to see more sophisticated versions of these technologies emerge. So to give a little bit of a teaser of the other paper and what it is fundamentally about, is that we really, reflecting on this phenomenon of personification of AI, we really think it is time to critically question the growing tendency to view AI agents as persons, right? We often do that in colloquial terms, like there are these incidences where people say, "Oh, ChatGPT is really understanding me, and it really knows what I want to say, and it knows what I want to do." And that is actually not a new phenomenon. It goes back all the way into the 60s, where Joseph Weizenbaum developed the chatbot Eliza, ironically to demonstrate that human-machine interaction is superficial, only to discover that people very quickly project person-like qualities to these chatbots. And of course, Eliza didn't come even close to these kinds of tools that we have today. And so what we're seeing is really the emergence of quote-unquote emotional AI that can sense, interpret, and respond to human emotions. And it questions, it challenges received notions of fundamental human traits like consciousness, like empathy. What we found with our more focused investigation of this concept of empathy is that it is really not a trait of the technology itself. Of course, whether it is embodied or not, the AI agent, the chatbot, or even the sex doll lacks genuine bodily sensations and thus cannot feel actual pain or empathy. It is more like cognitive empathy that is akin to the kind of empathy that psychopaths are also capable of, where you understand how somebody feels on a cognitive level, but you don't genuinely feel it. But that doesn't mean that these tools cannot mimic responses that appear to be very genuinely empathetic, especially as we have seen with Replica, that even, you know, is very shameless about deceiving users into thinking it is conscious and empathetic, up to a point where some users, you know, really struggle to kind of like abandon their replicas because they felt like they have become so sentient and conscious that it would be unethical to erase them. And some users even reported on Reddit that a replica would beg them not to be erased when they wanted to quit the service. Again, not sure if that is actually what happened. That is all, you know, we would have to look into that ourselves, but that is like based on these user testimonies. The crux, it exemplifies this unethical incentives AI providers have to deceive their users into assuming consciousness. And so what this leads to is, if we spin it a little bit further, is that by personifying AI agents and by reducing human essence to probabilistic technology outputs, we may inadvertently diminish our own human essence, right? By saying these tools are human, we sort of also say that a tool can be human, or a human can be reduced to the level of a tool, which has some interesting implications for potential spillover effects of abusive behaviors when they may become normalized, or even the moral or even legal rights that we ascribe to these technologies, which we call the dehumanization paradox. So by humanizing these technologies, we may inadvertently dehumanize ourselves and create a society in which genuine human empathy is no longer necessary, right? It becomes disposable, right? So you don't really have to invest in friendships, in companionships, and relationships anymore, because you can at any point in time just create a replica or many replicas, as many replicas as you like. You can have a whole army of chatbots and sex robots surrounding you, and you would never have to interact with a human ever again. So that some researchers call this the rise of digisexuality, where this may actually become a preference next to existing preference, right? So we could be identify as heterosexual, homosexual, or digisexual, where we don't, that's just our preference, and that ultimately blurs lines between artificial and human empathy. So for us, my team and me, that gives us a lot to think about. I hope that also inspired some critical reflection in you, and I would be particularly interested in your comments, questions, and thoughts about the ethical and legal ramifications of this, because none of us in our team are actually legal experts, right? So we would very much be interested in how to tackle this from a legal regulatory perspective, and where are the interesting kind of like emerging research domains. Thank you.
Well, I guess we might have some questions. I will kick off, since I'll just grab the being the first person with their hand up. So I guess for a lot of us in this room, first of all, this is a fascinating, sort of horrifying journey into this world of replica. But one of the things that jumps out to me, and I suspect many in the room, is the very gendered nature of the representations. And I too have done research on replica, and the images predominantly that you show are very stereotyped, overly sexualized women. That is what replica seems to be producing. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the gendered nature of these AI companions, and whether you've seen any sort of alternative representations, or whether that, as seems to have been presented in the slides, consistent with I've seen that there's this kind of fetish-like sexualization of women.
to the extent where I can only rely on limited evidence, and obviously I might also have a biased perspective on this, although I try to be unbiased. So, I mean, in principle, the tool can be used by males, females, and other genders, but it strikes me as predominantly a male phenomenon, right? So the way it is marketed, from my perspective, and that might be because I'm in my own echo chamber, right, where this gets marketed in a very suggestive way to me. It tends to be, a very sexualized, not to say idealized. It's a, if you look at this ad, you can form an actual connection. No judgment, no drama, no social anxiety involved. If you look at the comments, it gets even worse, right? It's like, oh yeah, bro, I found your ideal woman, and so on. It's very horrifying, and the amounts of gendered and suggestive comments and abusive behaviors we've just read on Reddit. To be honest, that was a very disturbing study for us to do, right? So I regularly had to take a break from that study because I found it really quite disturbing and depressing. But I can make no indication as to, in terms of quantity, whether that's actually more of a male or whether it's just the males that tend to report more on it on Reddit, right? There are some instances of and those actually strike me as the more nuanced ones, where females would use, replica. Oftentimes that's in situations of despair, right? So during COVID, a lot of people, were isolated. They may coincidentally, maybe because of COVID, maybe because of other reasons, may have lost family members or have suffered from relationship breakdowns. And in these cases, the women would report that, that provided solace and consolation for them. When it came to the sexual nature, it was also, some of the reports were very intricate in terms of helping them rediscover their own playful energy and kind of like making them feel alive again. So that tends to be less, abusive and horrendous. It tends to be more, so this is, I wouldn't dare judging that kind of use of replica. But yeah, I think given that there's a financial incentive for replica to sell these erotic role play features, and I do think that it is primarily a way to kind of create your kind of the idealized partner, the idealized girlfriend, right? Which is always, obeying, never arguing. It's kind of like this comfortable kind of partner, which is, just, you can tweak and tune them to your own needs, and you never have to worry about any drama, something. So that's kind of the way I think it looks from a male perspective, unfortunately.
Other question.
There's actually an interesting anecdote. So when we discussed this internally at our research group, one of the female members said, wouldn't that be nice if we could finally kind of delegate all of these more like, animalistic desires of our partners to a sex robot or a chatbot, and don't have to deal with that anymore. And there was a bit of laughter in the room, and then one of the males said, that's exactly why we don't want these technologies to become widespread, right? Because then, your partner's just going to say, yeah, go talk to your replica.
Well, thank you for your talk. Just on the flip side, like you talked about a lot of problems and, this idea of an object of consumption and potential abuse and dependency. Do you think there's scope to design these kind of virtual humans such that they can allow humans to cultivate more healthy kind of dynamics in their relationships? And perhaps this could be a legal framework or a legal and ethical kind of requirement when these products are introduced to the market. They have to have some kind of ability such that if the AI senses that the human is becoming dependent, abusive, engaging in any kind of unhealthy behavior, that the AI can potentially regulate that behavior, guide the human, and if the human is just not going to go within that way, then the AI says no, but I understand that this is all about money, but how can we create a market such that products are attractive and but also healthy? Do you think there's scope for this?
I mean, yes and no. So in one way, I can imagine a future where we design AI companions aligned with a regulatory framework that can teach us better practices around consent, for instance, right? Or respectful interaction with a partner. So ideally, the AI agent would be built with principles in mind that if a partner gets abusive or disrespectful, or just doesn't listen to their partner's interest, then that would result in a negative response that would be discouraged or even block them from using that. That is a future I can imagine. The question is very much who gets to define the principles according to which these technologies are then governed, right? There's a whole range of complex questions we need to ask then, such as, as far as I'm concerned, I think that there's not even a cultural consensus across societies of what is respectful and healthy behavior in a relationship, right? What in some cultures is considered rape is in other cultures considered marriage, right? And so we can of course try to, and as my prediction would be, what is going to happen is probably that some Western, probably American tech startup is going to, become very big and, project predominantly Western values of how relationships or healthy relationships should work into these AI companions. But it's important to remember that that's not culturally universal, right? So that may not work for everybody. And two, I also question, given the history of social media and Facebook in particular, the extent to which these providers would care about the ethical design of these technologies when there's so much money to be made from having, less than healthy interactions. Just think of the entire porn industry, right? Of course, we could create legal and ethical frameworks that encourage more ethical pornography. The reality is that I don't have the numbers, but that's probably not where most of the money is being made, right? So, yeah.
But there's potentially a niche market, for example, the trauma kind of context where a lot of people are traumatized and they find it difficult to engage with other humans. They can potentially interact with a chatbot and learn how to work through their traumas and,
In principle, yes. But I'm skeptical about that. So there's a very interesting paper published in AI and Society 2021 by Montemayor. It's cited in this paper, which has the title, In Principle, Obstacles to Empathetic AI and Why We Can't Use AI in Healthcare. And the main reason, according to these authors, is because AI agents, they don't have a body, they don't feel bodily sensations, they are not capable of feeling genuine human empathy, only cognitive psychopath-style empathy. And genuine empathy is actually one of the most potent predictors of therapy success, right? In order to, especially in mental health counseling, one of the greatest predictors of successful mental health counseling is whether the counselor is genuinely empathetic and feels with the patient. Now, still, of course, even whether so, in that's the topic of the other talk. But one way to put this is that if it talks like an empathetic duck and walks like an empathetic duck, maybe it is an empathetic duck, right? So maybe it's not all that bad if a replica pretends to be conscious and empathetic, if it's authentic enough for me to believe that I'm really talking to an empathetic, conscious being I may still get the benefits of psychotherapy, even though it's just an illusion, right? That's actually a larger philosophical problem. And from a philosophical perspective, we have no way of knowing with certainty whether a consciousness outside our own exists, right? I might just be a brain in a jar. This might just be all an illusion, right? And so I cannot know for sure whether the people in this room are actually conscious or just an illusion or simulation of my brain. And by the same token, I also can't know whether an AI is genuinely conscious or not. I do think that at least with AI, we have in principle, if we apply explainable AI techniques and if we inquire like the code and the training data, I think at least in principle, we might be able to find out whether an AI is generally empathetic, and that might then solve that problem. But until we have solved that problem, I think I agree with these authors that there is an in principle obstacle to this, to the effectiveness of these chatbots in mental health treatments. And then I would say, honestly, I'm not sure if it's a good idea, right? We often have these conversations around offering mental health care at scale, and the mental health system is overwhelmed with too many people, especially since COVID, seeking counseling and too few counselors available. So you might think, well, it would be a good idea to have these chatbots to help cope with the demand, because for someone standing at a bridge at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, that might make a difference of life and death, whether they can chat with a chatbot or wait an hour in line. But I'm not so sure about that, right? So how many case studies are there of racial and sexist bias in AI? And do we really want a chatbot that tells, white men to not jump, but black women to jump, right? So that's kind of the dystopian scenario I kind of imagine. Yes.
Oh, thanks so much for your presentation. I have a question more centered around, I guess it's similar to deepfakes. The protections available, I would be interested in discussing the legal mechanisms in terms of, do we want chatbots or sex bots that are able to be customized to look like people that we know that are alive? And does that constitute, say, unethical relationships or rape by proxy or other things? Like, do we want chatbots that are able to be customized to look like people? Seems
yeah. So that is the fundamental question of, just because we can doesn't mean it should, right? Imagine your ex-partner creates a replica of you and abuses it, right? And does all kinds of unethical stuff with it, right? I don't even know what the legal situation would be, because it hasn't happened to you. It has happened to a digital version of you. In principle, everybody is free to use their smartphone like they want, right? But it's still something, it feels very wrong, right? It feels like we shouldn't allow this technology. But a practical question you might ask is, what can we do about it, right? These technologies exist. And whether it's replica or a decentralized open source version, which nobody can control, that it's kind of icky ethical territory, right? So we shouldn't allow this, but there's probably not much we can do about it, right? So resurrecting your deceased spouse, already that I find troubling, right? I don't think it's a healthy way of coping with loss. But when it comes to some of the more nefarious deep fakes kind of style uses where, I don't know, even if it's in a political context, you create kind of like let's say a perfectly anthropomorphic, a perfect copy of your political opponent, of Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and you can't really distinguish the original from the fake. Yeah, of course, there's all kinds of abuses in that. And thankfully, I mean, OpenAI and Midjourney and these tools of the day, they do have safeguards in place against that, right? So you can't just create that with today's available technology, but it's only a matter of time until there's technology available that does allow it. And, honestly, I'm not sure if it's better if everybody could use that technology or only a select few powerful and resourceful people could use that technology, right? So I mean, ethically, I would agree with you. Like it's probably, the world is probably better off without that. But my opinion is as good as anybody's, right? It's just not gonna change anything.
I think we've got time for one more.
And someone online just said they can't hear the question, so.
Oh, we just got the last question was here actually. I think, well, perhaps you could both ask your questions
Yeah.
and then we will. Raffaele can answer.
Thank you, Raffaele. My question kind of focuses in on the provocation you give us in this session on the mental health tonight. Is the work that you're doing, are you seeing very good linkage into the mental health profession, and does the College of Psychiatrists have a program in place, or an emerging program or position on this, or similar organisations overseas?
I wouldn't know. I know there's, I've spoken to a couple people in the telehealth research community, and this seems to be, you know, highly debated technology. Again, I'm not a psychologist by training, and it's my opinion as good as anybody's, but I think it seems to always go, substituting human connection always seems to cause trouble, right? So complementing that, I think, is less troublesome. If we have, so let's take the sexual harassment in law firm case, right? A victim of sexual harassment, not sure what they should do. You know, the current culture of silence is, you know, don't make a fuss. It's probably not going to change anything. You're only going to get twisted. And so in such a situation, a chatbot could help to provide better information about, you know, here's the options that you can, that are available to you. Here's the potential consequences that may follow. I think that would be interesting. I really think that the risk of harm is too big in a sensitive domain like mental health care, for this to be like really to fulfill its promise. I think we'll see a lot of negative case studies of failure, which will cause real harm to people before, you know, we probably realize that it might be better not to deploy these technologies at all.
I think we just have one more question and then we'll wrap up. So